So we'll be beginning in about a minute from now, so if you could just wrap up those individual conversations, we'll start the community conversation. So find a seat and we'll get things started. We have a big agenda ahead of us. There is a table up in the front here with seats on this side, so there should be seats for everyone. You know, there's a lot of wisdom in this room. I can hear it from up here. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Joanne Roberts, and I will be your MC for tonight. I would like to begin by acknowledging the great privilege we have of being here on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish First Nation. And many of the members of the nations are here tonight. They are here tonight, though, as you are here tonight, not to represent any political body, but they are here as citizens and neighbors. So we thank them for their presence, and we say Haichka. We also have civic leaders and municipal councillors with us, but again, we are all here tonight as citizens who are part of this community and have a common goal. And so we're going to keep that in mind as the evening goes on. Let me do a little bit of the housekeeping. The purpose of tonight's gathering, well, it's to take part in the first of a series of conversations on what you think, real echo here, of what you think should be included, thank you, in a study on governance and amalgamation. So it is your chance to have input into the terms of reference, the parameters of this study, before the study begins. And I think we know how important that is if the study is going to meet the needs and expectations of the community that it is looking at. So thank you for being here, for being part of a community-driven process. So what's the benefit of coming here tonight? Well, for you, it will give each of you the opportunity to have your opinion heard. And the data that is gathered here tonight will be forwarded to the minister responsible and will form the basis for the ongoing conversation. Now let me talk a little bit about the process. As I said, we do have a fairly major agenda ahead of us. It will be divided into 3 major segments. We are going to hear in just a minute from our keynote speaker, and then you see in front of you 8 panelists. They've all volunteered to share their experience and their expertise with us. And it will ensure, and it's the reason we asked for panelists tonight, to ensure that we have a starting point, a jumping off point, which will lead, of course, to our second segment. So we'll have all heard the same thing when we start the second segment, which should start at about 6:30, 6:45. You're going to be asked to move into areas of interest. And I'll remind you again when we go to do it, but basically you can see around the room topics on the flip charts. And when it comes time to break into groups, I'm going to ask you to go to the flip chart that most interests you. And then once you get there, you will be told by a facilitator how you're going to proceed. And we have a facilitator and a scribe for each interest group. And if we have time, you will have the opportunity to move to a second interest group. We're just going to see how the energy in the room responds to that. And then we'll reconvene about 5 to 10 to 8 o'clock back at these tables. And our panelists will give us a wrap-up, their impressions in their subject areas of how the evening has gone. And then our final segment is an open mic. You'll be given a chance to ask questions of the panelists or put questions to the room, and that will take place sort of right here in the center. And then our goal is to be all wrapped up by 9:30. So, what roles are we all going to play in this, I think, momentous meeting? I think we'll be looking back at tonight and say that was the beginning of something. That was an important date in the history of our region. There are many roles here this evening. We have our content experts, that's what I'm calling the panel. But we have you as participants. And I think you have the major role here. You're going to share your opinions and your expertise and your experience. But we are asking that you listen to each other, that you take time to have something clarified if you don't understand it, and that you make time so that everybody has a chance to contribute. Tonight, everyone's opinion counts, and no opinion is worth more than any other. Now, as many of you know, I have lots of opinions on all kinds of things. You're not going to hear any of them tonight, because my role here tonight is to guide this process. It's a big agenda, and as your MC, I'm going to keep things moving. I'm going to make sure that we stay on track and get you out of here on time. So I like to say to everyone that I won't be involved in content. I'm simply preventing chaos. So one final thing I'm going to add before we hear from Dr. Janai Aragon is that this event has been organized and put on without any government funding. It has been funded by people like you, probably by some of you, through donations from the community. So it is a community-funded event. And it is certainly the hope of those who have helped put it together that this continues. So if you'd like to help fund going forward with this, just a reminder, there's a crowdfunding source and there's also a donation container at the back. And the conversation will be going on online, in social media. There's a hashtag and there's a Twitter account. So in many ways, we're the face-to-face, but our community will be joining us in many ways as we go forward. So thank you very much for coming. What a strong sense of support for dealing with this topic. And now I am very pleased to introduce you to one of my favorite people. Dr. Janai Aragon is well known to many of us in political sort of junkie circles because she's such a great social media maven and has lots to say about what's going on in the world of politics and community organization. She is an assistant teaching professor of political science at the University of Victoria and an interesting, intelligent, and well-spoken woman, and she is our keynote speaker tonight, Dr. Janai Aragon.
Thank you so much for having me today. Before I begin, there's a few things that I'd like to say. The first thing is I can't vote in this country. I vote in the United States. And so it allows me to often comment on politics and think, well, I'm arm's distance from it because I'm an American who's a permanent resident. And I am not going to weigh in tonight about amalgamation. Instead, I'm going to talk about the importance of tonight's event and also how important it is to participate in politics. Thank you kindly for that introduction, Joanne. I truly appreciate it. There's a preface, though, to my involvement here and other events in the Greater Victoria area. I've lived in Victoria now for about 6 years, Is this better? Oh my word. So there was no booing when I said I was an American. Now I know why. You couldn't hear me. Sorry. I do have a good sense of humor. What I wanted to say though is I've lived here for almost 11 years, and Victoria is now my home. There's no doubt about it. But about 6 or 7 years ago, I had come back from being in Southern California and thought, okay, I'm going to buy a pair of wellies, I'm going to have extra umbrellas in my office, in my car, and just get involved in the city. I started to network more, I started to get outside of Ring Road, outside of campus, and meet more people in the area. And it's made such a big difference for me, even though I only vote in the United States. And that's just for personal reasons. I joke with my spouse that he's my first husband, and it's an old joke now after 17 years. Let me get to my next slide though. We know that political participation matters. You're here tonight. I would imagine that the majority of us in the room regularly vote, write letters to the editor, or to our respective mayors, councilors, those sorts of things. We care. This is not the case for everyone, unfortunately. Who is most likely to vote? Well, I've already said the people in this room, but when we look at stats or statistics, usually people with a higher socioeconomic status. So white-collar workers, people with a university education, people who are more likely to be white or Anglo as well. So demographics do matter. And thank you to Elections BC for some great information. And I understand that the slides are behind me, so you might not be able to see this as well as people in the room. So I'll go ahead and refer to some of the data. If we look at who votes, it's roughly people 45 and older. So 45 years old, 54, almost 60% of this demographic will vote in this province. It's closer to 66% for people who are 55 to 64. And if we move to 65 to 74, 74% of that group will vote. And then 75 and up, 66% to almost 66%. When I am teaching a first year political science class and I query my students, so first year students at UVA, how many of you are affiliated with a party? The class might be 180 students or 240 students. I've never had more than 3 students raise their hands. Now, they're mostly 18 and 19, so they're just at that point perhaps outside of mom and dad's home when they might be thinking about politics. Of course, Andrew, one of my former students who's here, I think he came out of the womb thinking about politics, but that's just him, right? I've never had more than 3 raise their hand regarding, answering the question about are they involved with a party. And it always just stuns me. I started voting as soon as I could. I do think this is changing though, or maybe I'm just getting different students in my classes when they're closer to 20 to 22, but we need to change this. So least likely to vote, younger people. People with a lower socioeconomic status, so people who do not have a college education. People who are non-white, people who are younger, who are working a blue-collar job. You see the poor and the unemployed, and this is the hat tip to Elections BC, who heads to the polls, their March 2010 information. Also, who's less likely to vote? New immigrants to Canada. We've witnessed, though, with other provinces, primarily, the way in which parties are trying to capture that group. What makes a difference, or what has made a difference in BC in particular? Advanced polls. Now, it's not just the notion of advanced polls, but issues that people care about. And so we've seen an increase with this. I would hope that we'll see a difference with the fall, with the federal election, and the next time we have a provincial election, that we see more creep up with the turnout. I truly truly do believe and advocate that local politics is where we all can make the most difference. I often have bright-eyed students in my office saying, I want to go do this internship in this other country and make a difference. And the first thing, maybe even the second thing that I say is, have you voted? What are you doing in the community? There's people here who can use your help, or wherever you're from. It's just that Victoria or Nelson or Kelowna or Vancouver doesn't seem as exotic. But it's truly the place where they can make more of a difference. We know that the get out the vote efforts are important. The campaign, right? Name recognition. Right now, there's a lot of posters all over campus up at UVic because of the student elections. It's just littered right now, different walls with posters with the get out the vote effort. Now, today's event, when I was contacted by some of the organizers, I think I must have pressed yes and then submitted that email instantly because I do feel it's an honor to be here. I feel like I am part of this community, the Greater Victoria community. Even though I don't vote, but I do get involved in other ways. Related to this is that I do see young people doing other things, marching, organizing, attempting to get the university to divest out of fossil fuels or support the current investment portfolio. There's different points of view on campus regarding that. So I do think that we need to remember it's just not voting, although voting is incredibly important. But I do see students working with nonprofits in town and elsewhere trying to make a difference. Now, overall, in many of our lifetime, for many of us, we've witnessed a decline in voter turnout. It's a problem. How do we get people to care? Get them to come to events like this. I mean, hell, in the Greater Victoria region, you just say one word and people will froth at the mouth. Sewage. And where is it? Who is that near right now? Sewage. I know that there is a board with that particular phrase or sewage treatment on it. You're at the table. Hot potato. Have fun. One of the other things, the way in which it's water, sewer, and waste. Thank you very much. One of the ways in which we've seen participation change in North America, and here I'm referring primarily to the US and Canada, is the use of social media. So for those of you who are on Facebook tonight or on Twitter or other social media platforms, please use the hashtag YYJConvo. That's CONVO, no space. We're also seeing social media used in artful ways and embarrassing ways by candidates or office holders. So we see that there's an increased footprint for social media use by people of all ages. This is good, yet it's also something that we need to be careful with, because you're just a tweet or a photo, a selfie away from perhaps people shaming you, a scandal, those sorts of things. But perhaps tonight we can think about using this hashtag and using the conversation from today to document the conversation. We're not going to agree at all of the tables, but this is the beginning of a continued conversation. The easiest way for us to make a difference is to be at events like this, to care about local politics. Now, in political science, I'd say it's been about 5 to 10 years, if not longer, we've seen the use of the term local, where people are trying to say that local politics are global. I'm sure you've seen some of those bumper stickers, especially if you ever drive through Fernwood. Talk about local and global politics, those sorts of things. But it is a way to make a difference. So there may be 1 or 2 people in here who are from Fernwood. I heard some chuckles at the back of the room. So issues matter. Advanced polls are a great example of this. We've seen an increase of people going to the advanced polls. We need to support this. We also need to understand that there's so many different issues that we need to be concerned with. We know that the hot button one is sewage. We also need to be concerned about schools, transportation, education, the aged, the arts, which we at times think of as being a secondary or tertiary concern. So there's lots at hand for tonight's conversation. Issues and advanced goals are important, and I would argue that this might explain why we had a slightly better turnout in 2013 at 57.1%, almost 2% higher than the turnout in 2009, which was at 55.14%. So issues matter. I do think if we have this first conversation and continue to have conversations, heated, teasing out what we believe, the government will pay attention. Because right here, we're all coming from either Victoria, Saanich, or Bay, and it's important that we have these discussions. I also think that it's not just in real life or face-to-face, but discussions online. I don't remember off the top of my head the website for the organization. Joanne?
I think it's simply Greater Victoria Conversation.
GreaterVictoriaConversation.ca. Continue tonight's conversation on that website. Follow it after tonight, because I do understand that there'll be screenshots of the different discussions. The facilitators will also take notes. So go to the website, GreaterVictoriaConversation.ca, correct? Thank you. Also, messaging is important. So one of the things that I would like to end with is an important story that made me get more involved in this community. Veronique De Silva, a local photographer, and I'm not sure if she still owns this business, she used to organize these events for women in town. And there were a women's networking group, and any money that was raised was given to Bridges, a local nonprofit that you might be familiar with. And so in the last couple days, when I saw a GoFundMe project for Veronique, I was almost drawn to tears because I thought, this woman did so much for Bridges and other women in the community. Now she needs our help. So I'm going to end with just a quick reference to her GoFundMe page. It's www.gofundme.com/MUOJWG. And I will make my slides available to the organization. Mama Bear and her cubs need help. Here's someone who has dedicated various fundraising efforts to Bridges for Women, who has now left an abusive relationship, has a newborn, I believe her daughter is less than 2 weeks old, and a 10-year-old daughter. I am hopeful that this will be like one of the other Kickstarters or funding efforts that have taken place across North America, and the person involved has met their goal. Here we have a community leader who's helped other women, now in a position in which we can use social media to help her. So I wanted to end on this note about Veronique, and of course I did have her permission to share her story. I wouldn't do so without it. But thank you so much for having me here tonight. I look forward to being here and to following the website and see what happens from tonight's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janai. And we're going to move right to our panel now. And each of them will speak for 3 minutes, and we'll coordinate the microphones as they go along. And you will hear from them at the end of the evening as well. So we're going to start with Dr. Trevor Hancock, who is a senior scholar and professor in the School of Public Health and Social Policy at U of A. He's also one of the founders of the Healthy Cities and Communities movement, and his topic, or his area of expertise this evening is governance. Trevor?
Thank you.
I'll take this one, I'll start that one.
That's better. Thank you. I'd like to thank Janai for doing most of my presentation for me, which saves me time to talk about some other things. I'm here to talk about governance, and for me there are two fundamental questions. And one which she started on is what is the state of our democracy? But the other, which to me is in many ways even more fundamental, is what is the focus of governance? What business is or should governance be in? And I'll come back to that in a second. So in terms of the state of our democracy, Janai's already covered a lot of ground. I don't need to recover that ground. What I will say is that we often talk about participation rates. I want to talk about lack of participation rates. And so if you look at the inverse of that, right now in the 13 municipalities here in Victoria in the last election, the proportion of people who did not vote ranged from 47% in North Saanich to 81% in Langford who did not vote. The average was around 65%, so almost 2/3 of the electorate did not vote in the last municipal election. If you compare that to the federal election, it was 39% didn't vote in the last one, and almost 45% didn't vote in the BC election. If you then look at what proportion of voters did it take to elect a mayor, about 14 to 31%. So it doesn't take many people to elect a mayor, but then it doesn't take many people to elect a majority government either. 24% of the electorate voted for Stephen Harper, 25% voted for Christy Clark. If you look at the eligible voters, the registered voters, not the proportion of those who actually voted. So we have a rather distorted form of democracy in that situation. It doesn't sound like a very healthy democracy, but in part that's because democracy isn't only about voting, and I think when I was making that point, I really stressed that. It's much more than voting. But at the same time, we have a lot of people who are not. And why are they not? Is it not seen as relevant? Are they apathetic? Are they turned off? Are they using other venues? What does democracy look like in the 21st century? So those are some of the questions that I can get into. But then in terms of what is the focus of democracy, I'd just like to say it's the people who are stupid, which is a rebuttal of Bill Clinton's famous slogan, it's the economy stupid. The federal and provincial governments think that governance is all about the economy. Municipalities do not. If you look at how municipalities measure progress, they measure progress in terms of quality of life, not GDP. So I think we need a conversation about what is it we're trying to achieve here and how do we achieve it. And I'll just end with a quote about governance from the UN Habitat. The sum of the many ways individuals and institutions, public and private, plan and manage the common affairs of the city. We need to think about what our common affair is and how we do that.
Thank you very much, Trevor. I'm going to ask if you could pass the microphone to Karine Green, who's sitting next to you. Karine is a former councillor in Obey. She is a community leader and a well-respected voice on issues in this region. And her area of interest tonight that she will be speaking to is neighborhoods, parks, and recreation.
Thank you very much, Joanne. Thank you all for being here. Bear with me, I'm just getting over a bad cold. First of all, I wanted to say that neighborhoods are as diverse as the people who live in them. Neighborhoods are defined as a vicinity or a nearby area with distinctive characteristics in which people live, work, and play. Neighborhoods provide a sense of well-being, security, pride of place, belonging, and cohesion, and can be bound together by common values and shared activities. Neighborhoods contribute to health and quality of life and provide opportunities to collectively address or voice concerns and issues. For instance, in Victoria, there are 13 neighborhood and community associations. And just quickly, a show of hands, how many of you belong or have ever belonged to a neighborhood or community association? Wow, that's a good majority. Thank you. So you know how important they are and what important roles they play in collective voice. At last count, in terms of parks and recreation, and I believe neighborhoods, parks, and recreation are all connected, they are interdependent. There are 33 regional parks throughout the Capital Regional District, as well as a number of municipal parks in each of our 13 municipalities. Our park system, I believe, is so important because it represents accessible recreation available year-round. Parks are key to maintaining sustainable green space and contribute to the well-being of our residents and our natural environment. On a regional basis, the Capital Regional District also funds and supports 3 major recreation centers: Sea Park, Juan de Fuca, and Panorama Recreation Center. And given I only have 3 minutes, I want to leave you with 2 very important questions as you think about your neighborhood. Neighborhoods, by the way, are not just streets and houses. They are apartments, co-ops, liverboards, float homes, and other forms of collective living. And I want to leave you with 2 questions as you go forward to your group discussions. What do you love about your neighborhood? You might not love your neighborhood, but if you do, what do you love about it? And why do neighborhoods matter? And why do they matter to you? Because actually, neighborhood is the closest place in terms of resolving issues, working together, and also providing voice to local government. And by the way, local government is closest to neighborhoods and closest to the people it serves. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. We're going to keep passing the mic down to Jamie Graham. The panelists are all guessing who's next. It's like a party game. Who gets the microphone? Jamie Graham is the former Chief of Police of Victoria, who's also with the Vancouver Police Department and head of the Canadian Association of Police Chiefs, so probably not a surprise that the area you will be speaking to tonight is emergency services. Jamie.
Thanks very much, Joanne. The issue with emergency services, or collectively what I'll simply refer to as public safety. My expertise is policing, but the amalgamated fire chiefs in this particular area are not unlike the police chiefs in that they command a very divergent individual set of departments, all in one fairly tight area. I think that the point for discussion will be the current structure, the way the policing is arranged now, the way the fire service is arranged now. Could it be done better? More efficiently, more effectively, so that at 3 o'clock in the morning when you're away and your spouse is at home and they phone the police at 3 o'clock in the morning because of strange noises in the backyard, are the constables that show up at your home, are they going to be there on time? Are they going to be there quickly? Are they going to come there armed with the information and the intelligence sharing that will allow them to solve the crime, apprehend the offenders, and bring them before the courts as soon as possible? And there are problems with information sharing. There are individual sections, I think, that should be looked at quite carefully. And I won't get into a lot of detail. This particular region is 4 separate, distinct municipal police forces, all reporting to their own police board, all having their own mayors as chairs of that police board. We are also surrounded by a very competent RCMP, series of RCMP detachments. West Shore has 5 individual municipalities, and I think they have 60 officers there. Saanich and North Saanich and Sydney has a municipal department up towards the ferry terminals. 11 departments in this small area. Does that make sense? Or would it be, or would we be allowed to imagine a regional force from the ferry terminals down to including Oak Bay, out and including the municipalities, the western communities, and up halfway the Malahat to Duncan? Or what the heck will take Duncan to? Does that make sense? Could we go with a regional force combining all the officers together, combining their budgets? Would that be more effective? Would it be more efficient? Would you be able to maintain a community policing philosophy? The issues of salary, individual police chiefs, the money that would be saved through salaries, the money that they save through information sharing is quite remarkable, really. And I'll be traveling to individual tables, and anyway, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chief Graham. You can pass the mic to Dallas. So it's going. Yes. Dallas Gislason is a community builder and an economic thinker and developer and entrepreneur. He is right now the head of the Greater Victoria Development Agency. We're thrilled you could be here tonight, Dallas.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and to everyone who's come out tonight. I want to start by a quick poll of the audience. How many people in here have children and or grandchildren who live somewhere else, either in Canada or the United States or wherever, who don't live in Victoria? Kids, grandkids, lots of people, okay. Second question, wouldn't it be nice if those children or grandchildren, or both, had an opportunity to come to Victoria and make a life here? Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah, would be nice, wouldn't it? Yeah. So I'm here to talk about the economy. It was said that municipal governments don't pay attention to the economy. I don't think that's true. I actually think there's actually no such thing as a national economy. In fact, I think there's no such thing as a provincial economy either. I think there are only regional economies. And there's a collective sum of regional economies that covers the entire globe. That's what I believe. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions here to consider as you go forward, and I'm going to go over there to the economy section there. First question, what is the economy? Second question, how do we intervene in the economy to make it healthier or better, perform better? And then how do we measure the success of that intervention? Okay, so I think it's important, I think municipal governments play a very important role in that intervention to make economies healthier, greener, cleaner, all those things. So I want you to think of the economy as like commerce, right? So commerce, the flow of commerce. In municipalities or in regional economies, that commerce flows inside of a container. How do we know what that container is? Well, I'm going to tell you there's 3 criteria of what that container is. The first is commutership. So it's the relationship between where I live and where I work, right? And that geography within there. The second thing is human behavior. Where do I shop? Where do I play? Where do I go out for dinner? Where do I consume arts and recreation facilities? Where do I take my children to daycare or sports and those sorts of things? So human behavior. The third one is natural geography. So it's things like mountain ranges, rivers, oceans, Wanafuka-related waterways. So that natural geography. So that's the 3 areas, right? So live and work, human behavior, and geography. The next thing I want to do is I want you to think about a container. So here we have this container which we define with those 3 things. And I want to think about it as like a bathtub, right? So a bathtub has 3 components. So we think about the intervention, how we intervene. 3 components. So there's the basin, so it's the water inside the bathtub, and that's the flow of commerce. The second portion is the tap, so that's the water that comes in. And the third one is the drain, so water goes out, right? So that's how economies actually behave. So we have water leaving the bathtub all the time through imports, through other forms of leakage. And then we turn the tap on, water comes in. That's an analogy for wealth creation. So there's a number of interventions that we can look at municipally with how we reduce leakage and how we create wealth and opportunity. I'm going to close off by saying just what is currently going on today with regards to intervention. Here we are in the 15th largest metro region in Canada. Out of 28 metro regions in Canada, we actually ranked 27 out of 28 last year for job creation. Right, so if we want our children and our young people to come back, we're not doing so good at that, right? So the current interventions that we currently compete between municipalities instead of rising the tide that will lift all ships, and that's what I want to end off with. There's opportunities to do that, in my opinion, and hopefully we can start talking about those. Thank you.
Thanks. The lights are open. Thank you, Dallas. And now if you could pass the mic down to Janet Crocker. Janet has a background in public policy development and communications and years of management experience in a range of business activities. And she's going to address a subject area that I think affects so many people in so many subject areas in so many ways. It's certainly one that is contentious in the region, transportation. Janet, over to you. Thank you.
As Joanne said, Where's the bottom?
Working on,
There you go.
as Joanne said, I've been asked to come tonight to speak about transportation. I recently conducted a transportation study. It was regional transportation authorities, a stakeholder analysis and jurisdictional scan for the capital region. So transportation affects all of us in different ways, from our commutes to work, to the delayed delivery of services, also the inability to obtain services at certain points of the day, depending on where you work or where you live. Unfortunately, congestion slows down the economic engine of our region. So what is transportation? Many people consider it roads and highways, but it's really more than that. It's roads, highways, bridges, cycling, walking, and public transportation. And not only how all those things individually, but also how those things need to work together. So our current state, as you know, is very complex, and that's why you're all here tonight. For transportation, unfortunately, we do not have an overarching authority that is responsible for planning, implementation, as well as the overall vision of transportation in our region. We have 13 municipalities, Public Transit Commission, CIPS, Capital Regional District, as well as Ministry of Highways. Congestion traffic is anticipated to worsen. As you know, in the West Shore, we've seen significant growth to date, and our population projections for 2036 are 450,000 people, which is about 100,000 more than we have today. So at your table today, with the transportation table over there, I hope that you guys can consider a few things. I'd like you to think about what are your concerns currently for transportation, what are your concerns for the future of transportation, as well as your transportation needs, and any potential solutions that you may consider, and also the unintended consequences of those solutions. And most importantly, do those solutions get at the heart of the issue? And finally, before I leave you, I would like you to leave you with one thought, and that is we don't want to end up like Hazel McCallion, which many of you know as Hurricane Hazel, the 36-year mayor of Mississauga, Ontario. She recently retired and she had one regret while leaving office, and that was not planning ahead for transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. It's coming down to Stephen White at this end of the table. Stephen is certainly well known in this community when it comes to arts and culture. He is the executive director of Dance Victoria and has been responsible for attracting international acts to come to the city and for building an audience for those acts. He does have a background in theatre from the University of Windsor and has also been involved in economic development. And he is going to speak to us now about arts and culture. Stephen.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for showing up, folks. So, Victoria, we're very fortunate to have such a vital arts sector. In 2012, Dr. Brock Smith of the Gustafson School of Business conducted a study of the economic activity of the greater Victoria arts and culture sector. And in his study, he measured two activities, total economic activity, which is expenditures by artists, arts businesses, arts and cultural organizations in Greater Victoria, regardless of where that money was spent. And secondly, local economic activity, so the same organizations, artists spending money locally. And so the study reported that the total economic activity generated in the sector in 2012 was $177 million in net income, supporting the equivalent of more than 4,347 person years of employment and almost $17 million in property tax. In terms of the local economic activity generated in 2012, it was almost $140 million. Currently, arts funding resides at the CRD Arts Development Office. It migrated to the CRD in 2000 from the Intermunicipal Committee, and currently 8 municipalities contribute, the 4 core, and a second group of contributors, or group 2 contributors, Sydney, View Royal, Highlands, and the Chosen. The group 2 contributors are contributing at 30% of full participation, so 30% of what they should, or what the other core are contributing. The CRD awards about $2 million to 32 operating clients each year. This is organizations like the Symphony, the Opera, the Art Gallery, the Belfry, Dance Victoria. About $150,000 over 2 deadlines to fund a project to 30 or 40 clients. And they also have small awards called idea grants that support art projects undertaken by non-arts groups, like social welfare groups. The annual grants budget is dictated by the CRD board and has increased about 2% each year in the last few years. Prior to 2001, the service contributed about $595,000, and it increased to $1.8 million over the first 5 years at the CRD. There's discussion right now in Esquimalt that the council is considering holding back 50% of its annual contribution to the CRD to fund Esquimalt projects. This is a concern within the arts community. So like any CRD service, the municipal contributions are voluntary. And you know, if there was amalgamation, it's probably going to look the same. I don't have any questions for you, but I'll be over there, we can talk some more.
Thank you very much. And now the microphone's making its way to Robert Randall at the end of the table. Robert is co-chair of the Open Space Arts Society and a former leader of the Downtown Residents Association. And he's going to be speaking to us about social issues. Robert, thank you.
Thank you very much for hello, hi. Hello. Yeah, I'm probably the least qualified of all the amazing people on this panel. I came through social issues via my work on the Community Association, which was the Downtown Residents Association. I remember one of the most eye-opening meetings was going to one of the committees was the downtown service providers. This occurred at, I think Jay might have been on one of those, 7 a.m. at the art place, and around the table was just what everyone involved in social issues. It was really amazing to see how many different agencies are involved from all levels of government. There's everything from Ministry of Health, the Health Authority, VHA at the time, there were Victoria Police, there was City Hall staff, there was City Hall politician there. There was someone representing the VICOT team, which was the Victoria Integrated Community Outreach team. There was someone from the Assertive Community Treatment team, which are, those two are sort of the frontline workers that are actually down in the trenches working with the hardest to house. And to see all these people around at the same table was really amazing. And they would actually, they wouldn't even talk about sort of high level things. It was really down nitty gritty stuff. They'd be saying things like, well, I saw Dave down on the street today, and the Ministry of Health guy would say, oh yeah, I was talking to him last week. And then the VHA person would say, okay, well, I'm going to send a person out there to talk to that guy. And to actually see all these different groups interacting with each other in a positive way. And that's just something that's only been happening since about 2007, 2008. Unfortunately, there hasn't been a lot of progress since then. I think Victoria has done a lot on the housing front. But this conversation that we had was really only one of 13 municipalities. This conversation is not happening in any of the other municipalities. Every municipality contributes in some small way to the overall problem of social issues, but really, of all the issues on the panel, probably social issues, particularly homelessness, is kind of the most topsy-turvy because all the services are concentrated in Victoria. There is no, for instance, there is no emergency shelter outside Victoria. There's nothing, if you are caught out on the streets at 3 a.m. you need a place to sleep, and you're in Saanich or Sydney or Oak Bay or the Western communities, you're sleeping in a doorway because there is no emergency bed. So that's something that really needs to be worked on because people who are homeless and call on those services, they come from all over the CRD. Something like 73% of people who identify themselves as homeless are from the 4 municipalities. So a lot of work to be done still. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Robert. Well, our final panelist tonight, you guys can figure out yourself who hasn't spoken. Yeah, there we go. is Chris Korf. He is CEO of Pivotal IRM, a land economist by training, but a leader in resource recovery, waste, and sustainable energy. He's worked for both the private sector and for government. And some would say he drew the short straw tonight. He's going to speak about water, sewage, and infrastructure. Chris.
Save the worst till last. I'm going to try and keep this fairly brief, and rather than dwell on sewage, pretty much everybody who came through this door probably has an opinion. So I'm going to encourage the people who sit at the table tonight to try and come up with one new joke about sewage. Try and keep it light and try and keep it respectful. I think if you can bring your perceptions respectfully tonight, you will have won. Everybody's got a view on this. The thing which I would say in all seriousness is that this community here is not going to take a decision on whether treatment should be done or not be done. That has been directed to us. Our friends south of the border are watching us. They have a naval base. They fly over it, they rate, and they even sent a representative to check whether we get it right. So I would encourage you to think about that. Tonight is in great part about governance and how this should be done. While the debate will no doubt gravitate to systems and technologies, money, and a load of other items, but the focus is mainly about the governance of waste infrastructure. So to encourage you to think about not what treatment is or not what it should be, but perhaps how. It's a different question. Is this a shared model? Should it be a community model? What is it today? Do you know? And what is the governance structure and strategy amongst that, and what is the direction model? How does it work? Remember, this isn't just about sewage, this is about waste too. It's about liquid waste and solid waste and the infrastructure that goes with it. How should governance for that work? Should it be different? Should it be integrated? What should that be? Before you jump into amalgamation, because obviously this is at the moment is at the CRD table, just remember that old saying, small is beautiful. Is that perhaps right? Is there a different model? Should you be thinking about that? It doesn't just apply to sewage, it applies to the other tables. So I'd end by saying try and be positive, even those violently opposed to whatever the perspective is that they don't have. They come from the perspective of being violently in favour of this region getting it right. So we're all here today actually to fight for the same thing. That's the one thing that everybody can agree on. We all want the very best. So I would encourage respect on this highly topical, extremely sensitive issue, and a healthy debate, and good luck.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you to the panelists. I don't think I've ever seen a panel be so efficient because we are actually right on time. So, they have given you something to get you started. Your job now will be to discuss what they had to say. And what we're going to do is you'll see around the room these flip charts with the different areas that are going to be discussed. And what we need you to do is go find the flip chart that represents the area of interest you have. You will find, I think the facilitators and the scribes may want to get to those, yes, here they go, they're starting to set these up now. And right now, don't worry about whether you have a seat, get to the flip chart that interests you, and the volunteers who are there, both the facilitators and the scribe, will tell you what to do next. We are going to be in this process until 8 o'clock when you'll be called back. Again, just a reminder, as we heard from Chris, for this to work well, we need to share the air, let everybody have a chance to say something. Let's park as many biases and labels as we possibly can so that we hear each other. And all of the information that is there will be captured and brought back to us. I do want to recommend, again, the website. because if you haven't been on, grab whatever's left there, be back in your seats in about 5 minutes from now. We're going to have a wrap up on our panelists and then open mic for question and answers for 5 minutes.
Either way, amalgamate all the remaining cookies. I hope that's not one of the charts. I noticed all the good ones are gone. There's a consensus at all the tables. Those really sweet ones, they went first. They went right away. Thank you for the timekeeper role.
Trying my best.
Yeah.
Mostly good.
Yeah, mostly they stuck to it.
If I could have the panelists come back to the stage now, we get ready to move on with our wrap up. So all of the panelists, thanks, Alice.
I want to shoot.
All right, I got 1, 2, 3, 4. I need 4 more.
Oh, I think everybody. Oh! Yeah, good question.
All right. Still looking for us on the stage. Yes, I see Chris Cornell. Green's here. Jamie Graham. Jamie Graham, right? Oh, there he is. All right. So let me explain what happens from here on in. We're going to give our panel a chance to reflect on what they heard in the groups that they attended. We're going to ask them to keep their closing remarks to about 3 minutes, but we're going to give them up to 4. So, woo, generous. But obviously more time for question and answers if we don't use the whole 4 minutes. So aim for 3, we'll give you a warning at 3. Tony, you heard that? Warning at 3, and unquote. And then at the end of that, we're going to open it to open mic, and I will hand the mic to Tony to identify the questions and decide who gets the mic up here. And I'm actually going to move to the middle of the room with this mic. And so if you have a question, raise your hand or come over and I'll give you the mic. So that's sort of how it's going to work. We're waiting for one panelist. We gave you permission to leave the room briefly. So I think we'll do this in reverse order. So Robert, we're going to start with you and then do Chris Core. So Trevor, if I could have you hand the mic down to Robert Randall. You might remember that Robert was looking at social issues, and when I was wandering around, I heard some great discussion going on over there. Robert, so do you want to give us what you gleaned from what you heard?
Thanks, Lynn. That's a huge issue, and I tried really hard to capture some of the discussion around the table. One of the first things we talked was social service supports are a regional issue, and there was an acknowledgement that Victoria carries a disproportionate financial burden of those social service supports. We talked about whether we can make design efficiencies to make them more effective. We talked about would amalgamation help us use resources better and avoid confrontational competition for resources that create those bottlenecks. Because I think it was like a lot of rock Peter to pay Paul type of thing going on there. We talked about the current climate provides an inequality of services. We need, I think first off, we need to study and identify the service gaps by municipality. And one of the examples was why are women's shelters not in all municipalities? Why, when you cross a border, aren't there certain services for different groups? There's a lot of, I think we could break it down demographically. We talked about social service supports being broken down in terms of mental health, First Nations. We talked about the lack of representation by First Nations at this meeting today. Income inequality, youth, and some practical things. We talk about why there's no 211. Like apparently they have over in the Lower Mainland. If you dial 211, you get instant access to information about social services. We do have a crisis line, but this would be in addition to that. We talked about childcare and recreation. I think when we talk about social support services, a lot of it is focused on homelessness, shelter beds, but childcare and recreation are part of that social support as well. I think that kind of sums up just a sort of a very brief skimming of some of the topics we covered in that roundtable.
It sounds like you did certainly capture some of the discussion that was going on, Robert. Thanks very much. We're going to move now to Stephen White, the other end of the table. And Stephen was sitting in on arts and culture. And I know that a couple of times there was quite a good conversation going on. Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Joanne. It was a very rich conversation. I think underpinning all of it was the value of the arts in people's lives and how that's not really commonly understood. And I'm not sure that we came to any conclusion about how we articulate that better, but that really we need a fulsome understanding of the value of the arts so that we can move forward in a meaningful way. It was noted that a region this size, there is no performing arts center, which is atypical of Canadian cities of this size. And these were, this was kind of taking the current temperature in Victoria and thinking about beyond now what might happen if amalgamation occurred. There was a conversation about more community engagement with the arts, more community arts engagement, recognition of that, that people were surprised around the table that the funding is so fractured now with just the 4 core municipalities contributing at a 100% level and 4 others at a 30% level, and then the rest not contributing at all. That was new information for a lot of people. And one person actually talked about, and I thought that really resonated, was the lack of a long-term vision for the arts. What is it? What is a sustainable model for the arts? What is the vision going forward? And I think we still left the table wondering if amalgamation was going to affect any of this at all, whether, unless it was, and we came up with some great questions. So I think those will help the debate.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Why don't you just pass it to Dallas? And Dallas Gustafson, you had pretty full tables over there on the economy.
Yeah, I was very pleasantly surprised with the discussions at our table. It turns out there are a lot of people that care about this, and I'll kind of go through some of the discussion that was had there because I think it's really interesting. We talked a little bit about kind of the definition of the economy in the region, and actually kind of looking at the differences of what's occurring today with regards to competing for land development versus a more kind of holistic looking at job creation and household incomes and kind of all the bigger picture stuff. We talked about how do we marry our economy more to our land use, taking a real progressive modern approach versus a kind of a more traditional tax incentive approach. How do we actually rally around that? We talked about some of the interventions that could occur by looking at, talking about what other cities are doing, what are the options that are available to us as a region, as a community. What really resonated in both groups was that they talk about the value of a vision for the region, similar to the arts issue. An economic vision for the region. How do we actually go about achieving that? Given that our region is very full of unique communities, you can't have the same vision for the core as you can for Metchosin. How do you recognize and really kind of create that almost a portfolio of assets, but a regional unified vision at the same time? We also talked about the focus on strengths and assets and the importance of not trying to be something we're not, but just look at what we are and building off those strengths in terms of economic strengths. Strong emphasis on the value of a strong leader, or strong leadership to make this all happen. Because we said, if the economy is going bad, whose job is it to intervene, right? What do we do? We need strong leadership there. On that note, we talked about what will actually motivate our region around this issue. The fact that we have a fairly low unemployment rate. This is a vibrant community in many respects. What's that pain point that we can actually unify around and say, actually, we do need a strong economic vision. What are the opportunities to actually move this region into the next 10, 20, 50 years? What will motivate us to pay attention to that? And then what's holding us back now from achieving that? So that's the other thing. We talked a lot about protecting kind of the long-term idea of protecting industrial land, but also ALR land and creating kind of an urban containment strategy, like putting economic development where it needs to be, but keeping our natural beauty and our agricultural land intact. And then again, I just want to reiterate, how can we develop a regional economic development strategy, a regional economic development vision that has a strategy associated with it to actually, it's going to achieve something, knowledge, industries, quality of life, attracting young people, families, all that sort of stuff. But then also, lastly, an action plan or an implementation plan around making that happen, making sure it has a funding mechanism and a way to make it happen as a region.
Thanks very much, Dallas. And now let's hand it down to Jamie Graham, and we'll do Jamie and Janet and Chris kind of in a row here.
I'm not leaving, I just have to use my props.
He has notes.
Props.
So I've recapped some of it. A lot of talk by our group, and thank you very much to the facilitators and the people, some very smart people at our table. A lot of talk about being collaborative. What is the problem with emergency services? For goodness sake, be collaborative, share information. Better integration came up quite a bit. Questions about that. Questions that you may not be aware of about what are called communication centers for police and fire. There's way too many. Why are there so many? We could be dispatched out of one big center out of Kamloops. If you wanted to be, it's easy, the technology's there, but multiple centers, huge costs in terms of structure. Lots of talk about amalgamating services. This came about in a number of different phrases: amalgamation, regional police, and regional fire. What's the province doing about this? Why isn't there a stronger provincial position in policing in terms of regional policing? And a lot of talk about emergency preparedness. This is not talked about a lot. Is there comfort in this region that if we suffer what's called the big one, and I mean a real disaster, a Christchurch, New Zealand kind of disaster, tsunami, are you comfortable that everything is ready to go? Are there assets and people and equipment in place that will keep you safe? If there isn't, there better be, and you have a right to demand it. And is it a provincial responsibility? Victoria could have the most wonderful plan in the world. What happens if it happens in Oak Bay? Are we going to give them our resources? Hope for the best. So there's got to be a real strong regional discussion about that, and a strong leadership from the province. I didn't get to the last 2 pages here, just a moment. Need for the provincial study to improve police operations. Lack of equipment, that comes about in terms of the disaster preparedness. The assets to help in a disaster. Lots of comment about, I hate the phrase, but lots of petty politics. Failure of the politicians to act. Provincial politicians included. Planning for emergencies. And province political emergency preparedness came out a lot. So, thanks, John.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Jamie. And if you could bring the mic back up and give it to Janet. Certainly one of the things that I was hearing in your group was the need for transportation that links it all together. So Janet, what came out on transportation?
Okay, well, I had 2 groups that came through, so a lot of the topics that came through were common and some were different between the 2 groups. So just to summarize some of it, they did discuss the disjointed nature of our current transportation system. There was a need amongst the groups for increased public transportation while simultaneously reducing car traffic. They talked about connectivity between modes, specifically the cycling. There was also discussion about rail or streetcar as well. The groups also discussed the need for an overarching authority, which we currently don't have. They also expressed concerns over inhibiting economic growth. I believe we talked about attracting workers to the region and attracting investment and that sort of thing. So that sort of led to the need to quantify this into potentially the cost of congestion, and possibly a study that would relate to something along that line was discussed by the group. So that's all.
That's great. Thanks very much, Janet. And Chris, Cora, we don't want to leave sewage to the end, so we're going to ask you to report back on what you heard on water, sewage, and infrastructure.
Well, it was a very healthy debate, but sadly very few jokes. I do encourage you to start with more jokes. The question I think which came out most is what are we trying to achieve? The confusion about whether this is in fact treatment or waste management, or what it is that the goal is, what are the objectives. An issue of who is really responsible, do we really have to do this, came up with several people. Is this a local issue, or is it a regional issue, or is it a theme? Can it be dealt with by coordination rather than amalgamation? I made that note a couple of times. Several people asked in the note of what we're trying to achieve, what are the metrics? Are we trying to achieve minimum cost? Is it a net cost? Is it a gross cost? Public health, environment, those are both issues. What about water recovery, heat and other resources? Are those on the table? Those being carefully thought through? A great concern from both groups about speed and the need to get going, but at the same time an observation that the province can change the rules. So are there any rules or regulations that should be changed and reconsidered? Some observation that it's very difficult to get the province to move on that. I think the groups were expressing that they don't want to have another situation where one community is dominated by another, but at the same time others are saying that this should be enforced by the province. So there's kind of conflicting views there. I think I would observe it. Requests for information, but also expressed concern about the quality of the information, the ability to provide comment on it, and also understand that the information is indeed valid. Questions about the statutory and governance model, who is responsible for this? Quite a bit of debate around that in both tables. Suggestion of coordination rather than amalgamation, I think I've already got, and that's from the second group as well, to address the issues, but also something that amalgamation is the way to go to get treatment started. Some examples provided on that, and some dissatisfaction with the inability to move forward positively. I think I'd probably wrap by saying that overall these are very positive contributions, other than the fact that there were no jokes. Almost nobody said anything, but this needs to get going. I think pretty much everybody around the table said the same thing there, and that was stop messing around and get on with it. And although you could debate on whether it's centralised or distributed, most people were respectful on the issues of which of these it should be, and there was a good focus on governance. So congratulations to those involved. You did a very good job.
Thanks very much, Chris. Karen Green, you were taking a look at neighborhoods and parks and rec, something that, especially when you're looking at several municipalities, is often a concern. What did you hear?
Thank you very much, and thank you to the two groups that came through, and also to the facilitator and scribe. We initially set the tone for these discussions, and I think the feeling was the challenges are actually opportunities waiting to happen. There is a great deal of passion and caring at the neighborhood level, and there was concern about loss of neighborhood voice in the larger model. As well, there were concerns about funding fragmentation, so inequitable funding models and resource models that, for instance, our library system, only a certain number of municipalities contribute to the Greater Victoria Library System. On the peninsula, it's another library system. The same goes for the arts community. Only certain communities fund CRD arts, others do not. So this is a real challenge, and it affects neighborhoods on the ground. There was also a concern about lack of unity and coherence in the current model, and also that regional issues are distracting from local issues. So the issues of sewage, for instance, the issue of sewage is a big one, and it's distracting from the needs perhaps on the ground of local communities. I think some people felt that neighborhoods are a standalone topic and not necessarily grouped with parks and recreation, so that was a point well made. There was a need, people identified a need for information sharing with neighborhoods by whatever government is created or in place, that we don't get a lot of information as neighbors on the ground, and we don't get good data, and we often don't get it in formats that are useful to our citizens. And I guess the other point was to bring equity to the whole issue of governance, and although we were talking about governance, you can't get away from talking about governance when you're talking about funding and how people express voices. There was a lot of passion among the two groups, a lot of caring about their communities and neighborhoods. And I do remember one thing that Guy Nancy said, I haven't quoted it exactly, but he said, get involved, be involved, stay involved, and be an activist so you can actually sleep at night. And we have a lot of activists in this room.
And finally, Trevor Hancock, we're going to ask you to deal with the big question that was underlying all of these, and that is governance.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a big question, and it started with, well, maybe I'll start it, but I'll start with a big question, which is, came up several times, which is, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And how well is that actually defined? So people like the idea of amalgamation, it seems, but how well have we defined what that problem is? The answers dealt with some of the things we've heard about today already around duplication, fragmentation, inefficiency, sort of multiple business licenses that you have to get, or leasing or transportation, all of that. But a sense that we hadn't truly come to grips with what the problem was, and if we don't really understand the problem we're trying to solve, then we're not going to solve it the right way. Quite a bit of discussion around what is the common vision or purpose, and is it possible to have a common vision or purpose across such a diverse community with rural communities and urban communities and all these different values, but also a sense that yes, that's possible, that there are some very strong common denominators like human development and education, health services and so on, policing that everybody wants, and so surely there's some areas where we can find common vision, as well as allowing for some differences and diversity within that. In terms of going back for a moment to the what is the problem that needs to be solved, part of the solving of that problem, part of what was identified as the problem, has to do with more efficiency, certainly, but also much more accountability. So what is the issue around accountability, and how do we make governments at all levels, but particularly at this level, more accountable instead of too many appointed bodies? And part of the study should be a study of how do we improve accountability. And what does that look like in the 21st century when you've got social media and all sorts of other ways? There was quite a bit of discussion, although certainly some comment incidentally in the context of social media and all the rest of it. Look around the room, as I said earlier, who is not here? And how do we engage all of those folks that are not represented in this room in a useful and meaningful way? And that is going to involve social media and a lot of other approaches such as that. And what is democracy? Democracy, of course, is much more than voting, and that also came through. But how do you engage people? And part of that engagement has to do with neighborhoods. And so we I'm going to end up with some discussion around neighborhoods. One of the interesting things that came up, a couple of times the issue of ward system came up, and I had actually been meaning to mention it, didn't have time. So I did a very quick straw poll, and I said, how many people here would prefer to have a ward system rather than an at-large system? And it was an overwhelming majority were in favour at that table in that straw poll of a ward system. A sense that our politicians are not known to us, or maybe not from our neighbourhood, don't understand our local issues, we don't have that direct accountability. And certainly if you're talking about something more amalgamated, then at the same time you need something more local to counterbalance that. And so that was an interesting thing to consider in the study. Also, I threw out, the word is a kind of technical one, the European Union has a principle of subsidiarity. And maybe one way to approach this study is to use that principle. The principle of subsidiarity says you just assume that everything is decided locally, and then look at what does it not make any sense to decide locally, and you move that up to the next level. And that might be an interesting way to look at what needs to be local, what needs to be municipal, what needs to be. So some things might just be decided on a ward basis, or what we might call wards, neighbourhoods, and what needs to go up to the regional level, and what for that one needs to be provincial. And so notions around that and around kind of another idea is to look at it in terms of what's sometimes called zero-based planning. So imagine that we didn't have a system of governance and we had to recreate one, rather than trying to take what we have and tinker with it, at least as a thought exercise to think through what would it look like if we started with 350,000 people and thought about how we organise that. So that's another fairly radical way to think about what governance might look like.
Some very creative thinking at all of the tables. One thing I will point out, we have captured what was written down, and you've heard some of the summaries. If you were in a group and you feel that what you contributed maybe wasn't captured, because I know the scribes are working really, really hard to get it all down, but a lot of discussion going on, feel free to email if you feel there's something you want to expand on or send along. And the email address is greater YYJ convo, like conversation, convo, so greater YYJ convo @gmail.com. And that's on the website and everything, but they're going to be watching that to add what comes in to the conversation as they put all of this together. As well, any of the panelists who would like to take their remarks tonight and send them to the webpage or send them by email, those will be posted, because there was a lot of great material that I know people were interested in having. So, I think we're going to thank everyone at the end, but shouldn't we thank these panelists? And I really am thrilled to see the room is still so populated. It means all of you have really engaged and stayed with us, which is great. And now we're going to ask you to take part in an open mic question and answer. So Tony Joe, who is of course well known in this community as a full-time professional real estate, I was going to call you magnate. I think I can call you a real estate magnate, because you're my real estate agent. No, oh, I'm sorry. And of course, Tony is not just known for his professional work. He's known for all the community engagement that he's involved in. It would take us the rest of the night to list them all. It's all on the website. He's also just a great guy to keep things going. So Tony's going to decide where the questions come from. I'm going to go stand in the middle of the room. You can hand the mics over here, and I'll capture being
All right, actually, I think the thought, Joanne, was we were going to get people over here in front of the camera.
Oh, I thought the camera was coming with me. No? Have we changed your mind on that?
Oh, okay, so we can hang over here together.
People could stand in front
right
of
here?
the black piece of paper.
There we go. All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for still being here. And this is the time of the evening where you have the opportunity to speak. So this is the open mic section here. Actually, I'm just curious first, by show of hands, who here would like to have some time at the microphone? All right, this might go by very quickly. This might go by very quickly. So here is what we have in mind. First of all, again, we are recording everything tonight. The hope, and we have our first speaker, sorry. You will, if you won't mind coming up here, perhaps let us know who you are. Naturally, this is a forum for people to speak. I have been empowered to make sure that things don't go too long. So ideally, if you have something that you'd like to address to maybe one or several of the panelists here, or if you have a specific point that you'd like to bring up, that would be great.
And again, just to repeat, that everyone who comes up here will be on camera. So
Yes.
for some reason you don't want to, you have to go stand over there.
So we'll get you over here.
Okay, really quick and really brief, and it got touched on, but certainly from the groups I was participating in, I think it could have been touched or brought forward a lot more. I would just like to ask for a show of hands that if we were to move forward into amalgamation, how many people here would see a word system as being the way to go? Just so we can get a clear indication. Okay, thank you.
Actually, as it is something that you brought up, Trevor, would you like to further comment on that?
I've got about 4 microphones here, so as I said, I was going to comment on it in the first place because I spent a number of years working in the city of Toronto and living in Toronto, and I knew who my ward councillor was. And I think there's a real merit. It troubles me a lot. I live in Sandwich. On a couple of occasions, we've had a couple of councillors in our area, of course, Tillicum. Right now, we don't have any. There isn't really anyone who knows our area and who I feel understands our issues. There are people who understand issues across Sandwich, and I'm sure that's true for other parts of Sandwich and other parts of this region. And it's always seemed to me that having someone who you know is your councillor, who deals with your issues, who knows your neighbourhood, and can be your connection to a voice to council is much stronger than having 8 or 9 people who are elected at large and who might live on the other side of town and may not know much about your issues, and you may not know much about them. So I like the ward system.
Anybody else want to comment?
Panel? Yes?
I was actually remiss in not mentioning how important community associations and neighborhood associations are to neighborhoods. And they often serve as that voice to local government and other authorities. So I want to acknowledge that both groups that I listened to talked a lot about the importance of their neighborhood and community associations. And we saw at the beginning, a show of hands, many people here belong to those kinds of associations. And I myself have belonged to 2 of them, and they really are a voice for neighborhoods. Thank you.
Right. Anyone else on the panel?
Can I answer something about the board? That the Victoria Council has a process.
Would you like to come up?
Necessarily, but they'd have to have a process where the councillors are associated with a particular region in the city. And it's just ad hoc. But that's worked fairly well. They become knowledgeable about our area, even though they weren't elected from our area. So then they're the liaison with the community association and the council.
So just for the benefit of the camera here, the point was the City of Victoria has councillors who are assigned to certain areas, even though they don't live in a specific neighborhood.
Not necessarily.
Okay. So that's great.
It's kind of a committee boardish type of approach.
Okay. No comment there? All right. Next question.
I had a comment, but I don't really want to hear on the screen.
It's fine.
Okay. My comment basically is that regardless of the system that we have, everything depends upon the quality of the leadership. I mean, you can have the most rotten system in the world and have a good leader, and it works wonderfully. And you can have the best system in the world with no leadership, and it's going to not work at all. I guess the thing that also strikes me is that there has to be a sense of balance. There has to be a sense of balance between just exactly who has the power and whatever kind of structure you're creating. Some municipalities, simply by population of whatever, will have more power than will others. At the same time, if we're talking about broad visions across the region, across CRD, whatever, we can agree on a vision, but I know from experience that I've had, not here but elsewhere, is that select community associations, they can be bloody awful to deal with and be a real hamstring in anything broader. There has to be a balance.
Okay, so if I can just again comment for the people who are watching online here. So your first message was about the importance of leadership and how that is crucial and vital. And the second is balance as far as perhaps larger areas overpowering the smaller ones, right?
That's right. And the way that power gets distributed downwards.
Distribution of power. Any comments?
Yeah, Chris, I've got it to me, yeah.
It came out at our table with reference to the view field and the Swinehall issue. In that, in essence, the power that was given to CRD was to enforce a direction on the Swinehall to the province to try and enforce that and the province declined. The challenge is a real one, and so I won't get into the detail of it except to say that the evidence has been not terribly good that there's a resolution to that in this area. So if you're going to go the route of amalgamation, I agree with you. I think the issue is a very real one, and how do you overcome that dominance when democracy is actually how we're supposed to be running things?
Anyone else want to comment on that? We do have someone who would like to
specifically. With dealing with the governance issue, one of the things that I think at all levels of government is there should be a methodology where we can recall somebody or a government that we're not satisfied with. Did you discuss that at all within governance?
So the question is a recall system, or sorry.
Certainly, it's part of accountability. And
accountability with
several
council.
governments that have come across it nationally, locally, regionally, where people are just not satisfied, we should have a methodology where we can pull that government out and say you're fired just like everybody else.
So if there is a method for a community to recall people if they're not satisfied, all right?
Well, it wasn't discussed. It's an interesting point. I think that you have an opportunity to throw people out every 3 or 4 years now in an election. So I think that the threshold to throw someone out between elections has to be reasonably high. But for example, there certainly could have been a recall mechanism for Rob Ford.
Okay. Anyone else? All right.
Just simply risk the event and I'll shut up. Accountability to me has been a new buzzword over the course of the last decade or so. I have seen over the tenure what accountability means now is that you don't put anything on paper.
Okay. So your observation is accountability now means that you don't put anything on paper. It is meaningless.
Does anyone want to comment on the fact that what happens when it is community-driven leadership? We did hear a lot about top-down, and I think we realized some of that may not have been satisfactory at this point. I think one of the things that I saw online on the website for this group is they're hoping that by going to the grassroots and making this a community-driven initiative, that it'll go from the bottom up. Any of you want to comment on that?
Thank you, Joanne. I have actually witnessed 2 occasions where the community up or grassroots-driven influence changed the course of a decision by 2 local governments. One was slot machines at Sandown in the early 2000s. I actually got involved in that citizen-driven, grassroots-driven issue, and we were able to reverse the decision that was planned. The local government was planning to institute slots at Sandown gaming expansion, and we were able to turn the finger in the other direction. The other one, which was much more controversial in some respects, was Oak Bay Lodge, and that was where a group of neighborhoods and neighborhood communities, the neighborhood association, got together and successfully challenged the local government on the suitability of that particular proposal for its particular neighborhood. So there is grassroots accountability. I think grassroots community-driven initiatives do have influence, do have moral suasion, and can influence decision-making at the local level. But it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of organization, and often residents, they get very tired of what they perceive as fighting City Hall. But believe me, you do have power and you do have influence. It just requires strategy and organization, and lots of hours.
Back to Viewfield, because it really is a very good illustration for all its benefits and negatives of both accountability and also grassroots democracy. Mayor Desjardins and the council determined that what they should do is open the ability for the broader community to observe on whether Esquimalt was the right location for sewage treatment, whether you agree with that or not. What you can't disagree with is 99.2% of the people that spoke, and there were over 110 speakers, all spoke against the plan, and the council listened. I think there is a challenge if you would call grassroots democracy, and I think the benefit to this event and other events is that the integration with the communities and actually engagement is positive. And I think Mayor Desjardins would know that votes increased and there was accountability for her. And I think there's probably been accountability in other regions where mayors have lost seats and others have gained because they've held that accountability. Now, the one thing that I would suggest to the room is, was there accountability right the way throughout the system, or did the negative and positive debates only happen at the mayoral level? So I'm not sure they happened at the council level.
Question? Further question? All right. As it seems, nobody's coming up. Are you coming up? Okay.
You can share
Yes, got it.
Henriette Frake, and I just want to say it's about the money, honey. I'm tired of these great big wages, outlandish wages, and severance packages. We need to set a wage standard so that this way we don't get robbed continuously.
Comments?
Anybody want to take, Jamie, you're moving, did you want to answer that? Standard
All right.
wages across,
point taken.
point well taken.
Yes. Next. Anyone else? Yes.
Want to, it's all right, I have a big voice.
I just want to address the question about grassroots. We hear a lot of reference to public engagement, public consultation, and both of those, without a doubt, in my experience in the last 20 years here in Victoria, is they are top-down. And the real term that needs to be used, and needs to be used in terms of saying it as well as practicing it, is public participation. That starts at the bottom, and I have not yet seen any of the cities in this region practice it. So if you can, I think that going back to Viewfield, which is actually where Chris and I met, when we started a forum in Victoria West, when we found out that they were going to build a sludge factory on the doorstep of people who lived there, very close by. And that really was the start of where we wound up with the CRD now, having to look at a whole new way of dealing with sewage because the community organized and fought that and fought it successfully. So that was public participation. When the storyboards were laid out by the CRD at the so-called public engagement sessions, we didn't agree with a lot of them. And so members of the public just made up new signs and actually took them in and put them right under the boards that were untruthful. And everybody who was being met at the door by CRD representatives was met by a representative of the anti-CRD group and escorted around. Actually, I'm not so it was pretty fun. But that's public participation, and that's what should be encouraged, not engagement and not consultation. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm put in mind of Sherry Armstein's ladder of participation, which goes back about 60 years now, and everything from tokenism at the bottom to true power at the top. One of the things I had wanted to mention actually earlier was that we should be looking at the experience in, for example, Brazil. I spent some time in Brazil with participatory budgeting, where a proportion of the funding that is allocated to a community area or an issue, not the entire budget of the city, and this started in Porto Alegre, but a portion of the budget is assigned for the community to decide how best to spend it. And so there's various different models out there, but we should be looking at that sort of thing. Another example, Finland and Iceland have experimented more at a national level, admittedly, with what they're calling crowdsourcing of policy, where you use the internet to generate policy ideas, where you use the internet to generate referenda that, in the case of Finland, I think it is, or Germany, I forget which now, if you get a large enough number of voters votes on a digital referendum, the question has to be discussed in Parliament. So you don't direct the Parliament to make this particular decision, but you force the discussion to happen in Parliament through that. So there's mechanisms like that we should be looking at. And also, my favorite example, and I think every municipality in the country should have one of these, when I was in Belo Horizonte in Brazil, I discovered that they had a deputy secretary for democratic participation. And ever since I saw that, I've said to myself, given how important democracy is, why doesn't every council and every provincial government, certainly every council, I'm used to the word cities, have some position like that? Someone whose job it is to ensure democratic participation. To me, that's so darn obvious that we shouldn't even be debating it, we should just do it.
So we got a question here from Twitter.
So the following question came from Twitter from @BusDriverForLife. Gus the bus driver. Question is for Danny Brunner. It's a two-part. Could we see combined fire and police departments before amalgamation? And the second part is, would this be saving money at the manager-chief level?
Yes and yes. Regionalization can be a number of forms. You could, in theory, regionalize your policing service and have the CEO or the chief of police report to 13 municipalities. It's doable, but it'd be for a busy time visiting all the council meetings and so on. What was the second part?
Second part is...
Oh yeah, well, you say it simply because the salaries for individual chiefs are varied, and in this region, Victoria, I'm not sure, the chiefs, whatever the chief salary would be, would probably remain the same. Then if there were sub-districts, then they would be at a certain managerial level that would be dictated by a pay grade and probably negotiated contracts. Most police chiefs and deputy chiefs now negotiate with their police boards as to salaries. So, and any savings would be poured back into hiring officers or IT upgrades, that kind of thing. So, and the other thing too is, I noticed there were some municipal politicians in the room, and I'm not just saying that they were there, but I attended many, many sessions in Victoria Council chambers and listened to them and listened to participation where people would appear for hour upon hour about a variety of wide issues and the utmost patience, and that was great democracy in action. I just didn't want people thinking that we're not being represented. I mean, we elected these people, and I'm, once again, Ben, and I'm not saying because you guys are here, Chris, and two great councillors, and I dealt with them. I feuded with them over different issues, but they were supportive of what we were trying to do. I thought they were doing a good job. I'm not looking for work.
Sure.
Right here. Okay, good. I'm Emerson Graham from Oak Bay. And what strikes me partly about the opportunity of this evening is that we are talking about regional governance, and we're also talking about a number of different issues. At the same time, what we can do is to be developing each other and ourselves as community leaders. And that is partly by becoming good participants in democracy. We already obviously are here because we are engaged and we care about things. And so the thing is, how do we continue to educate ourselves to be good participants in that democracy and to become good leaders in that democracy? And also in our community associations. I'm vice president of the Community Association of Oak Bay. And one of the things that I think about a lot is how can we facilitate leadership development and engagement. So it's that leadership and engagement. How can we keep doing that? How can we keep thinking about that in everything that we do? Because as we sit around these tables here, it's great. We are talking about certain things. At the same time, it's an opportunity to get to know each other, person by person, and to develop those networks and relationships which can continue to make a big difference in our municipalities and in our region. I think that's a statement rather than a question, but any comments would be welcome.
Well, I was going to ask you what the secret is. You're searching for that.
Part of the secret is showing up. I think part of the secret is to think, what are the skills that we each can develop within ourselves that will make us people who not only have something to say, and also are figuring out step by step how to say it and how to value what others are saying at the same time.
Thanks. Comments? Anyone?
Comments from the panel? Anybody want to take that one on? No, okay.
Good statement.
I'm Brian Gilbert, I'm from Victoria. I've been following the sewage issue, and I'm here to share a bit of information about what went wrong, but what can go right in the next year. As part of the regulation, they are required to consult the public before making a decision, which they did in 2009. And once the decision was made, they were only required to engage you and give you information after decisions had been made. This coming year, we're at the stage where they have to redesign the liquid waste management plan. So they're in a stage where they must consult with you and us beforehand and get our input. So this next year has been very critical, and this is a great chance for us as a region to work together on this. At the Community Association, I believe, too. As you start to look at the issue, you've got to look at where the pipes are. And that's where the areas might be where plants might go, treatment facilities. And then we want to have a discussion about what opportunities there might be by putting a plant in a neighborhood. What benefits can you get from the energy, the water in that location? So engage our people in that information and share it. Educate ourselves. One of the challenges we had at the table was sharing complicated information. And that's what Corinne mentioned, getting it down to the neighborhood, getting the information down to the people that can actually make a decision, or help the people that do make the decision form an opinion. So I just want to encourage everyone to keep on top of this. The East Side is going to have a public engagement. They've hired a really great consultant. I think it's going to be a great year. It's going to be very interesting. And so keep in touch.
Thank you, Brian.
Anybody want to add to strike? We're good?
No.
How about questions from the floor? Because there's no law that says we can't wrap up a little early. You have put in a lot of hard work. We've been here, most of us, since 5 o'clock. 4 hours later, you're all still looking engaged, bright-eyed, a little, coffee might be starting to wear off. So is there anything else that's on someone's mind that they'd like to get out? Here comes Kathy. Okay.
Thank you. It's fun. I was writing, so I was stuck not to say anything, but now I get to say something, so that's kind of nice. So I live in Strawberry Vale in Saanich, and I heard a lot at our table and also from the summaries that were just listed, a lot of discussion about regional vision statements, about an arts vision, and about an economic vision for this region. And I'm just really curious from what you were saying, I think, Trevor, or maybe it was, I can't remember who it was exactly, about the idea of crowdsourcing that information. And I'm wondering, do we want to leave that vision development to the top? Or can we find a way that we and the others in the communities can build a vision and send it up?
Yep, second.
Thanks, Karen.
Yes. In fact, part of what I've done over the last 25 years in numerous, and I'm not selling myself by the way, but in numerous communities all over North America and to some extent in Europe, is healthy community vision workshops. And you take a group of people like this, only if we were doing this as a vision workshop, what we would do is I would take you through a guided imagery where you would see yourself, the way that elite sports people, so if you see that skier before they go down the run doing this, they're going down the run in their mind's eye and doing it perfectly. And it's a well-accepted technique. So you take them through guided imagery of what their community would look like in the future if it was everything they wanted it to be. And then you have them draw it. And one of the beauties of drawing is you may have 3 PhDs and be the university president, but you draw like a 7-year-old. And so it's a great level. You can have someone in the room who's functionally illiterate and homeless, and you can have someone who's the university president, and they're on the same level, which is really interesting. And then you take these pictures and you describe them, and what you also describe in the process is both the qualitatives, because you do it in tables of 8 or so. And so you get these wonderful quite childlike pictures, and I'll tell you right now, it's always summer. The sun's always shining. But there's some very common things that come out. One of the most interesting things is when you take people through the exercise, they don't draw cars in their community. Almost never do I see cars. They draw horses, even if you get what horses do to the road. They have biking and walking and public transport and electric vehicles, but not cars and highways. It's really interesting. Anyway, but the other thing about vision that's really important, a friend of mine, Clem Weasel, who's one of the leading futurists in the world, years ago now said, vision is values projected into the future. So when we create a vision of anything, and particularly we do that in a community, what we're doing is we are projecting our values forward and saying, I value this, and if I had this, this is what it would look like. And so you can use, so vision is actually an expression of values. And there's all sorts of ways. You don't have to do the vision workshop process, but I think it's a really wonderful idea. And I think maybe that could be a next step, in fact, for this process is to start doing some vision workshops and find out what are the common themes that unite people and what are those common values that they're projecting.
Yes, thank you. And thank you also for your comments. And I just want to add one thing. I think one of the things, and this may be naive and idealistic, but I don't care, and that is that we describe these models that we talk about as top-down, bottom-up. I would like us to flip that paradigm and talk about out, because when neighborhoods communicate with each other and neighborhood associations communicate with each other, they're very lateral. And I think local governments should be much more lateral than they are. And the closest thing to visioning for most communities are official community plans. When you go through that exercise, that is a visioning exercise of sorts. But it is very, very much driven by councils and very much driven by constraint. So all I'm saying is, don't think of your local government as up there. Think of them as out there. Because there has to be equity in this process. Local government has to be equitable. Because you put us there, you employ us, and it's very important that we relate to you equally, equitably, and that's what I would like you to try and do, is flip the paradigm.
There's a very good comment made at our table, nothing really to do with sewage. What the question was, if you had a clean slate, what would you do? And it's a really important question to ask, actually, is if we come to the perspective that we've got the municipalities we've got the region that we've got the provincial regulations that we've got, and all the rest of it, but that's thinking inside the box. What if we have the ability to look at the region as it should be, to address the items that we need addressed? And I think going to Trevor's comment, and the issue here is if we're going to look at our values in the future, what should that look like? And it was a really interesting debate, interesting for the chat at the poop table. Yes.
Poop deck, not the poop
Any further questions? Oh, Brad.
So I have a general question. Is there anyone here from Sioux, perhaps? Or the Highlands? The children?
We had someone from the Highlands
Or Sydney?
I guess my question is, we generally, as you look at the results of the polling that happened, as you got further away from the core, the drive for amalgamation was getting a little bit less. We talked earlier about participatory democracy, and when you look at the curve of how people vote, I think that we have a vested interest if we're looking at participatory democracy. Maybe the next version of this needs to be held out at the Wanda Hugo Rec Center so that we can have everyone who is interested or has a position in amalgamation to be part of that greater conversation. We're talking for our own interests right now, and I think there's an unrepresentation of some of the other people who would be involved in that discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Brad. Well, this is the first of four, right?
Yes. And I just see some folks leaving, and I just want to mention, if you were a scribe or a facilitator and you're leaving, we'd love you to take one of the flower pots, because the flower pots on the tables are for the scribes and the facilitators, so before you leave, if you were a scribe or a facilitator, take your flowers.
Got one over here, Bill?
just a quickie, nobody stole the joke, and there was a joke told at our table. But basically it was, how many people in this room, how many people in these communities does it take to change a light bulb? The answer being 1, but the other 99 are going to say it was better the way it was.
All right, Bill.
I just wanted to build on what you were saying. I get to travel to Malahat to work up island, and I see a population, a shadow population to this community that commutes daily, and there's a lot of them. And I just wonder if there's not an opportunity to bring that into the conversation, because there's a whole bunch of people out there between Malahat and going all the way up to probably Ladysmith that participate in the transportation issues, that participate in the services being offered here, as well as the economy. And as we try to grapple with this issue, amongst 13 municipalities, I think it's a big issue. But I think if we look long term, we have to look at the regionalization of this economy and how we can do it together, not just in this region.
That's a great point for anyone who's driving north on a weekday at 7 a.m. Absolutely.
Yeah. If we don't have any other questions, I am going to tell you about one of the next events that's coming up. But before I tell you about the next events, this is my effort to keep you in your seats till I finish some thank yous. I would like the room to please thank the Victoria Film Club West, who have donated their services tonight to provide the filming and the videoing for tonight. Thank you to the Film Club. I don't know if anyone's here from TELUS, but TELUS made it possible for us to send this to the rest of the planet by putting in the fiber optics. Levi's there. The webcasting tonight was compliments of Photonic, and Levi's over here, so you can thank him. And certainly we have had unbelievable support from El Terrazzo, so thank you, Shelley, and El I am reminding the scribes and the volunteers again, these flowers belong to you along with this applause. So can we thank them one more time? And all the volunteers, too many to mention, but if you do go onto the website, you'll see many of the volunteers listed there. They certainly have done a great job, and we want to thank them. I also want to thank the founders, and I know we're trying not to isolate or point out people here, but the founders of the Greater Victoria Conversation are Lauren Daniel, Shelley Gudgeon, and Susan Jones, and I want to acknowledge all of the work that they've done. All right, I told you there were 2 events coming up. The first one, this has been all very congenial and pleasant. You guys have been all very well behaved. But there's something to be said for the good old-fashioned, well-ordered debate. And the Greater Victoria Salon, which is a group that's going to be holding regular debates in our community, something that goes on elsewhere but has maybe been missing from Victoria, formal debates, is going to hold a debate on amalgamation on March 24th, that's this year, so a month from tonight, at the Young Hall on the Camosun campus. So if you're interested, it will be posted on the Greater Victoria Conversation website, and lots of information if you just look up Victoria Salon is the search for that. And yeah, a debate, go right at it, pros and cons. You'll find out ahead of the debate what side you're preferring. Now, finally, the next big event by the Greater Victoria Conversation Group. It is going to be on April 21st. It is not going to be out at the Wondifuka Rec Center, which is a good idea, so maybe the third one. It is going to be at the Victoria Conference Center, and the keynote speaker will be Mike Harcourt. And again, if you watch the website, you will get lots of details on how it's going to be formatted. They're going to take much of the lessons learned here tonight and move them forward. This, as we said at the beginning, is the start of something something that will be participatory. I think I like that word. And I think it's something we need more of if we're going to put an end to some of the apathy. So again, a reminder, email greateryyjconvo@gmail.com, and all the information, the feedback from this will be at greatervictoriaconversation.ca. Unless the organizers feel I've forgotten something, the bell will ring and you will be dismissed. Thank you very much.
My card?